Well, I guess, Pablo, to start out with, I'd love to know, now that you've kind of been on the circuit with the film itself, what are some of the unique reactions you've had for people who've seen it, the different places around the world, different places around the country? I mean, how have people kind of gotten to explain how much they like the movie, or kind of conflicted by the movie even about his work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's been both those types of reactions. You know, he's a very controversial artist. He makes stuff that is kind of can get in your head in a certain way, which is what drew me to him. I mean, I've had recently I had a reaction where someone felt like the film had redirected their life and pointed them in the direction of what is true and important for them.
Wow.
And it was an incredible thing as a filmmaker to have someone say this to me, you know, which I don't even really take full responsibility for. I think the brunt of that reaction from him is coming from being exposed to Mr. Fish's work in the film, right? So I'm just showing the work, or the film is showing the work. And that's not completely uncommon. There's sort of variations of that, you know, people saying, you've given me permission to be brave. You know, people in general feel very inspired by him, right? Because he's a truth teller and he's unafraid and, you know, he's free thinking. And these are all things we want to be and can't always be, you know, because of how we have to navigate society and relationships and work and all these things, you know. So we keep a lot of stuff in check. And I think as a character in a film, people are like, you're what I want to be, you know, in a lot of sense. I had a reaction where somebody said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, I don't want to like it, but I do. It was this conflict. It was this strange, interesting, conflicted reaction about the film and his work in the film. And then, of course, you know, we've had a few walkouts where people just, they know the language, you know. It's so that's going to happen too. You know, there's a lot of adult imagery and language in the film, and it's not for everybody.
I was amazed when I rewatched it after a year, because we got it prepped for Austin and we weren't sure who was going to interview, so we both watched it. And then this time I watched it and I noticed I fell back in love with the intimate scenes with the family. Yeah. I really love the scenes with his daughter. The one daughter, when she starts cursing and he's like, no, no, no. And I love his explanation of Santa and how, yeah, I'll tell her about Santa, but then I'm not telling her about God or religion or anything that's fake.
Yeah.
Can you talk about capturing those moments, and especially husband and wife, the conflict, the money issues? There was so much more I didn't catch the first time because I was so attracted to the art and, you know, the vulgarity of what he was doing, where the family just shone so bright on the second viewing. It was amazing. Yeah,
that's the other thing that people really respond to, you know. I get a lot of comments about that. They're inspiring in their own way, because the girls are smart and snarky and just, you know, really plucky, and you know, his relationship with his wife is complicated and but loving, you know. You see those things, and you see this stress of the life that an artist lives, you know, and the stress that it puts on her to maintain the bills and keep the family up. You know, she's definitely the breadwinner in the family. In terms of how I got that footage, you know, I think Fish and I connected very early on, like day one, really, the first time I went out to film with him. And I think because he trusted me, that they sort of trusted me, and we just they sort of assimilated me into their family kind of quickly, really. I mean, first time I went out, I stayed at a hotel. He said, the next time you come out, you just stay with us.
Wow.
So then I come out again, now I'm in their house. Now I can film them having breakfast. I'm just sort of there. And when you're in that situation, people get used to the camera and things very quickly, you know. There's definitely always a little period of like, especially with the girls, they like to sort of perform for the camera. But even that kind of, they got bored with that after a while, you know. And I mean, some of those moments I'm just surprised I got. They just happened in front of me, and I just happened to be rolling. I mean, it's really that simple, you know. And you can get very intimate stuff that way, you know. And their dynamics around money and the stress around money, and you know, I didn't have to produce those things. Those moments just happened. You know, actually, someone in an audience said, "Did you tell them to do this?" And I'm like, I couldn't believe it was happening in front of me. You know, some of the arguments around money and whatnot, the stress around it.
Well, it almost seemed like you weren't there. Was the amazing part about it.
Again, it's just what happens when people get comfortable and they trust you as a filmmaker. You know, there was something in your question too about. Well, let's keep going. I don't know where I was going to go with that.
So I've got to ask, one of the elements of the ending of the film, the election really amped up his artwork and kind of, I think, revitalized him to some extent. He had another chance to put his voice out there. With the midterms coming up, have you, just in keeping contact with him, have you seen, does he rise up for the political stuff? Does he seem to not focus on it, but it kind of lights a fuse under him just because it's so ridiculous?
Not. You would think that the elections would be sort of a prime time for him. I think he finds the whole thing so absurd that it's not actually particularly inspiring to him. I mean, he certainly will. I think he'll probably produce a little bit more. I mean, he's really responding, I think, to the deeper, to the system in general. I mean, Trump represents a kind of unique phenomenon in American political culture. I mean, I think that's easy to say without being controversial. So, and it's certainly the sexism and the racism and the war chanting and all this stuff. Those are things that get under his skin, and he responds to those things fairly quickly. But they're like an election per se. I don't know if that amps up his battery to produce more work, you know?
Yeah. As far as the traveling of this documentary, how stressful has it been? How much fun has it been? You've been able to kind of go all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't gone to any overseas festivals, but we've been pretty much all over the country in a sense. I mean, lots of festivals on the East Coast, all up down the West Coast. Here we are in Kansas. You know, we started off. We met you in Austin, Texas, where we started. It's been a really surreal, wild experience. I mean, it's just. I actually started to get really frustrated at one point. I started to feel like, what am I doing running around? I'm spending so much time. Oftentimes I would get called for work after I had already booked a ticket to go to a festival, so now I'm losing money that I could be making. You know, that's definitely stressful, and again, I started to wonder, like, what does festivals mean? What does any of this mean, you know? For the film, like how does this push the film forward? How does this help the film in the end? You know, because you're basically giving away for free. You know, everybody gets to see it. I mean, the festival charges tickets and they make money, but I'm submitting the film and screening it for free. You know, for the most part. So I started to get all in my head about the whole thing and start to really feel like maybe this is just me running around and sort of having a nice little ego trip about my film, you know. And then we had a screening in Ashland just sort of when I was at my lowest point, and the response was just so beautiful. Like, it was that kind of inspired reaction that reminded me that I made a film for people to see, and people are seeing it, and they're enjoying it, and like that's just a great thing, right? Beyond whatever implications it means for the film, like as a phenomenon, it's great, and it really I sort of fell back in love with the festival route again, and have enjoyed it more since then, you know. So yeah, does that answer?
Definitely.
Yeah.
A question I know we asked when we were in Austin, but I think it'll have more light to it now. What are you working on post Mr. Fish? What's your next stepping ground? Where does Mr. Fish go from here? Kind of, what are the next steps for both the film and for you?
I mean, the film has been still remarkably full time. So we were dealing with distribution companies, and we had different offers, and then we settled on one, and then you're dealing with the contracts and trying to make sure everybody's on the same page. And meanwhile, I'm still going to festivals and still trying to promote for the festivals, and trying to figure out a theatrical run. We got a week-long run in Austin at the Alamo Draft House, and actually Alamo in Kansas also screened it for one night. So there's just constantly things to do around the film. Even now that it's sold, it's still, there's an amazing amount of stuff to do with it. So my father was a cameraman and a filmmaker, mostly just a cameraman. He died about 10 years ago. He had an experimental film that he was making on 35 millimeter that I've sort of collected in one place. I haven't gone through it yet. And I'm curious about that. I might make a documentary about my father, because he was an interesting guy. He worked on the Gimme Shelter's The Rolling Stone documentary. He actually shot the murder in the film.
Wow.
So he had shot pivotal things in film history, and was just a interesting guy. And I'm curious to see what his experimental film was all about. So that might be my next film. But I gotta see what he has there and see how I respond to it as material.
Well, I hope there's something there. That would be fascinating. Maybe even cathartic to some extent. It'll
probably be that for me, yeah. I don't know if that means that I turn it into a film, right? But yeah, I have a bunch of audio tapes. I just put one on in the car, and there's his voices. And like I said, he died 10 years ago. But it's just like I just start weeping because there's my dad's voice, And Fish is doing pretty well. I mean, he just curated another show for University of Connecticut about counterculture publications from the 60s and 70s. He's still publishing lots of cartoons. He's definitely, the thing I like to say about him now versus when I made the film during the Obama era is that during the Obama era, his outrage seemed really sort of far left and like sort of a little bit radical. And now his outrage seems just like mainstream. So, yeah, he's constantly busy. He's got books that he's working on, and he's as prolific as ever.
Well, Pablo, it was a pleasure to now be again on the journey with you.
It's good to meet you.
Yeah.
It's sort of at the beginning and almost at the end for me here in my little festival run.
Well, I hope the film does have life to it. It's like Dev said, it's one of our favorite docs. And,
oh, thanks, man.
I think it's important for people to see it. It's something that people don't know too much, maybe, or maybe they do. They still don't know the full story of Mr. Fish and his artwork. So,
yeah. Well, one last thing I'll say about it is just I don't think younger people have seen his brand of satire, like that really cutting, really dangerous. It hasn't really been in popular culture for 20 years. So people in their late teens and 20s are sort of like, what is this? And what box do I put this in my head? So that's something I'm proud of, that I'm kind of introducing the world to Mr. Fish, because there is something to explore there, and that art form is dying.
Yeah.
He is one of the last keepers of the flame, if you will.
I think that's the best way to end it, Pablo.
All right. Hey, great.